Okay, I think we're recording now.
Okay.
Hi, James. Glad to have you back with us again.
Hi, Vicky. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this interview and sharing with your audience. My regards to all of your Greek listeners and the people who follow your research over there.
Yeah, my audience was actually taken to you very much, and they liked you, and they asked for a second follow-up interview. So here we are again. How have you been?
I've been fine, just following world events, keeping up to date with what's been going on at the surface level, but also keeping tabs on what's going on behind the scenes as far
It
as
seems.
uh, things of like a, let's say, a higher dimensional or extraterrestrial nature. There's been a lot of activity in that regard all across the board. So, because I'm in frequent contact with people around the world who have extraterrestrial and interdimensional experiences, and they've been telling me that there seems to be an upsurge in activity,
Uh,
and
I think I
yeah,
think
so it's very interesting.
I think generally things are coming to a head on the planet, in more ways than one. Um, what's your take? Let me go a little further back. What's your take on the latest world events like Turkey downing the Russian jet fighter, for example?
I believe it's a provocation. They're trying to provoke Russia into making a disproportionate response, but Putin has been playing his cards very carefully, keeping a lot of his cards close to the vest, and he's not allowing himself to be suckered into
Uh, I,
doing something that he shouldn't. He knows, the timing is not right for. He's an old operator himself. He's been around for a long time at the highest levels of intelligence and in counterintelligence. Unlike a lot of politicians who play at intelligence, Putin is the real thing,
yeah,
and so he's not going to allow these provocations to pull him into a wider war until he's ready.
I totally agree on that. Um, the matter of Nibiru, or Planet X, seems to be coming up again and again. Uh, you know, all the time I keep hearing and reading stuff on the internet about it. I recently heard Phil Cava on Veritas Radio telling us that a friend of his, he didn't say her name because he didn't have her permission, but she was funded by Lawrence Rockefeller and had done impressive work at the National Institute of Health and other organizations. Anyway, apparently Rockefeller told that lady that Nibiru was real, that the government knew about it since the 80s, and that they had built underground installations, and that they thought it was coming in sometime towards at the end of 2012 or shortly thereafter. He also told her that before the public finds out about Nibiru, they will install martial law worldwide, basically before it's visible in the sky every day for all to see, so that they can contain the panic. That's one of the reasons for implementing martial law. What do you think about that?
I believe it's the primary reason for implementing martial law. Uh, the powers that be have to plan from their standpoint for any contingency, anything that would tend to destabilize and disrupt their control. And of course, they treat the common people as irrelevant and cattle, basically. So
Yeah.
we are not privy to that information. We have to figure it out on our own. When one looks at the preparations that are being made by the so-called elite, they are out of all proportion to the preparations one would think would be necessary uh, if a stock market crash was in the offing. One does not need to develop tremendous underground bases in order to survive a stock market crash. Something much bigger than that must be happening. And likewise, the elite, so-called, storing these huge seed vaults of organic natural seeds. They push GMOs and everyone else to poison everyone else and change their DNA. But for themselves, they have this huge stash of
Organic.
real organic seeds, and they're keeping it for themselves. So if they were preparing, making contingency plans merely for a stock market crash, they wouldn't need to do that. It must be something bigger than that. And it seems to me,
Although
hold
the
that thought.
stock market is also going down. Like I remember on the 15th of January, I think, Dow plunged like 390 points, something like that. That's also telling us something, isn't it?
Yes, it seems to me that they are trying to uh, create as soft a landing for themselves as possible. That there's a number of things running in parallel. For example, the the stock market and its steady degradation. All their efforts at installing martial law with these ceaseless, incessant false flag events, hoaxed events. Unfortunately, in some of these false flag events, they do kill real people. But the way the media, of course, spins it all out, it just seems like uh, people are just running around going gun crazy when actually that's not the case. It's just an effort, yet again, to disarm the public as a necessary, from their standpoint, prerequisite to imposing martial law.
Yeah.
But they're not going to be successful. There's just too many people
Well, the
with guns
public
in
is
America.
totally disarmed in Europe. I think that a
Yes,
hard time disarming the Americans, and I hope the Americans don't give in to it.
yes,
Um,
yes, because yes, that would be disastrous on their part to turn over their firearms. It's the last thing that's keeping them free, basically. Uh,
it's the
so
only
there's
thing, yeah.
these incessant, yeah, there's these incessant efforts to con the public, the cowed and public who's been turned into curs, into believing there are threats all over the place, be it ISIL, ISIS, Daesh, whatever they want to call it, these contrived bogus threats which is controlled by black ops.
True.
So it seems to me that they're trying to make things run in parallel and eventually, uh, you know, come to a point at sometime in the not too distant future where the stock market goes under, uh, martial law is implemented, quarantines,
Well, they're doing their
and
best.
curfews.
They're doing their best. Let's see if they're going to succeed. I have a feeling that people are going to rise up. It seems,
Yes, yeah.
as I said in the beginning, it seems that things are coming to a head on the planet.
Well,
Thousands of
the
immigrants, not all Syrian refugees, flooding Europe. And I
yes,
mean,
that's part of the agenda. That's part of the agenda.
not all Syrian refugees.
Most of them are not Syrians.
Most of them are from Africa, from sub-Saharan Africa, from Pakistan, and what have you. The global economy on the brink of meltdown, as we said. The globalists desperately trying to get national identity off people's minds. False flag terrorists hit in Paris. Pope endorsing world government. Give me your take on the Pope.
Well, the Pope is there to be the figurehead for all the Catholics. It's amazing that Catholicism still has relevance in today's world, considering the never-ending stream of scandals that emanate from the Catholic Church, pedophilia, widespread pedophilia,
Incredible.
uh,
This is
all of their
such a
mass financial
pedophilia is
fraud.
such a sore subject. I think it has to do more with Satanism than Catholicism.
Yes, and the Catholics had long since been taken over by that dark element anyway. That's what they used as an engine, along with the British trading companies, the East India Trading Company, the Hudson Bay Trading Company, the Virginia Bay Trading Company, et cetera, to spread their tentacles and their influence. It was a two-pronged offensive for a long time, where the Pope and the Papist forces, spearheaded by the conquistadors, their soldiers, as well as their missionaries and the Jesuits, just went all over the place, just wiping out indigenous societies and wiping out traditional forms of spiritualism and worship. And so the Catholics are desperately trying to remain relevant, just as NASA and all these discredited government agencies and mainstream scientific organizations are desperately trying to remain relevant. And we can draw a stark contrast once again with what's happening in Russia. It must be understood that Putin had discharged the national debt that was owed to the international banking cartel. He's kicked out the oligarchs that were installed by the bankster cartel, Boris Berezovsky and others like him. He does not allow GMOs in his country. He's made it very clear to immigrants that they're not going to bring in their Sharia law. That if they're going to come in, they're going to assimilate. They're going to learn Russian. They're going to behave themselves. And there is a lot of pride in Russia, where you see videos on YouTube of Russians, singing national patriotic songs. Whereas in America, it's like if you ask the average person on the street under 30, well, what's the 4th of July holiday all about? They won't even know. They'll say, well, it's
Oh,
about the 4th of
it's the same
July.
in
It's,
Greece. It's the same in
yeah,
Greece. They're dumbing everyone down.
they're dumbing everyone down
It's
because
good.
gradually and incrementally, and, and, and also they've really accelerated the agenda now. This, this wholesale process of subversion, which began long ago, has finally taken root, and it is, and we're seeing
Unfortunately,
its
so
expression and manifestations at all levels of society, where people are just dumbed down. They're literally getting run over when they're as they're looking down at their cell phones. They're falling off of cliffs. There was a guy in San Diego a few weeks back. He was looking down at his cell phone. He walked off a cliff by the ocean. That's what's happened to the
totally,
people
totally.
today.
Brains are not working properly.
Yes, and what we're seeing also, because of the increasing frequencies, we've recently gone through a period of really dense energy, and it coincided with this Mercury retrograde, but actually it started a little before that, where the energies were really dense, and people all across the board were going crazy. And you can see the failure of gun control, because in these countries that have already been disarmed, it's not stopping people from going crazy and stabbing people and
You don't
hacking
need a
people with
revolver
machetes.
to kill someone.
That's right. You don't need, and the only ones that have the guns in a lot of these disarmed countries are the criminals and the the black ops and the criminal regimes. So
Exactly.
yeah.
I'm
So
so
people should,
with you on that.
yeah, and people really need to pay attention to what's happening in Russia. I know there's a lot of criticism about Putin. Uh, I can only go by my intuitive take
Putin by far
on Putin.
is a better leader than the ones we see on
Yes,
the Western side.
and the things that he's doing is definitely throwing a spanner in the works as far as the globalist agenda is concerned. He's destroying ISIS and ISIL, whatever they call themselves.
That's
He's
really putting a damper on their plans.
That's right, because that was the justification for this mass influx of immigrants into the entire world, basically, all the in Europe and throughout the so-called Western world. So,
Europe is totally
you know,
flooded, and the Aegean is like a cemetery because they keep drowning the immigrants coming in towards the Greek islands, and the rescue boats from Greece are always picking up drowned children, and oh, it's terrible, really.
yes,
But
yes, it is.
as I said, it's not only refugees flooding Europe. That's the main problem here now.
And getting back to Nibiru, Planet X, Wormwood, the latest imagery I've seen, which I believe is valid, very clearly shows this very large spherical object, which is low on the horizon, which is fast moving. It's moving fast across uh, the panoramic view of the camera. Within a relatively short time, it disappears, which tells me that it's getting closer.
It's
And some of the imagery I've seen shows the planets and the moons around it. That's how close this thing is. We're not just seeing the so-called brown dwarf. We're seeing some of the planets around it as well. So it
it's like
must be getting close.
it's like a small solar system.
It is.
Mm.
It is. And despite their best efforts with chem spraying and creating these fake artificial cloud covers, if that's proper terminology,
It is.
the fake artificial cloud cover, at times you can still see multiple light sources bursting through the fake cloud cover. And you can also see an angry red, bright red sky.
Yeah,
Like
I've
in
noticed it
the
increased.
gap between the bottom of the fake cloud cover and the horizon, you can see this angry red sky, and that's from the iron oxide that's being exuded by either the brown dwarf or one or more of the planets. So, and that's completely unnatural. People look at it and they look at these pictures and they say, "What a beautiful
Yeah,
sunset!"
that's
That's
beauty.
it's not a sunset. That's
That's
something else entirely.
yeah.
And we're also seeing more and more seismic and volcanic activity all across the board. So
No
especially
accident
along the
there.
no,
Mm.
it's some of it can be attributed to HARP, the scalar weapons, the seismic weaponry, but not all. But I think the majority of it is due to the inbound approach of Planet X, Nibiru, the second sun.
Yep.
I think that by the time mid-year rolls around, June, July 2016, and manifesting even earlier, April, May, maybe even sooner than that, we're going to see a lot more of this
Yep.
extra mini solar system
My
because
gut
despite their
feeling
best
also
efforts,
says something about April, May.
yes, I think uh, April, May, March, April, May timeframe, things will really start hopping, in my personal opinion.
What do you foresee for this year? Maybe I have a feeling that, you know, I told you before, I have a feeling that something big is going to go down, whether by shocking
Yes,
revelations on all fronts, including the corruption in the political scene, the banksters and the function of the global system in general, or many people rising up, reacting to the so-called reforms, or even new discoveries. Give me your view on all this and then some.
well, like I mentioned earlier, we are seeing these efforts at the governmental scientific institutions at trying to maintain control, trying to stay relevant. Just the other day, they came out with this big woo-woo announcement about how they discovered this large planet just beyond the outer fringes of the solar system. Well, that's nonsense. It just you don't need to be an astrophysicist to go onto YouTube and look at all the videos there that show this inbound solar system. You don't need an astrophysics degree to see that.
That's
What they're
hate.
trying to do,
They give,
they're trying to
they give
corral and
hate,
reel in the.
uh,
What's that?
they're giving hate to the sheep, I think.
Yes, yes. Because they want to remain relevant. They want to be seen as the authorities on the subject. So this way they keep it arm's length. Okay, yes, yeah, they somewhat dilute the information put out by the private investigators, the independent researchers, by saying, okay, we're the authorities. There is a very large planet, but it's still far enough away. It's at arm's length. Okay, we see the same tactic with gatekeepers in the UFO field, where they focus incessantly on UFO sightings rather than abductions, rather than underground bases, rather than UFO crash retrievals. You can always tell a phony fraud in UFO research because they focus obsessively on lights in the sky and UFO sightings
Yeah,
because it's at
and
arm's
in
length,
general,
it's non-confronting. Yes,
in
it's
general,
non-confronting.
they're giving little bits of truths, a
Yes,
whole
yes,
big tapestry of lies, so people
yes.
get confused. And then they have this other system now. They try to make you feel safe, and but they simultaneously give you fear. They
It's
need
all yes, it's all about double speak. It's all about uh, teaching people to hold mutually exclusive, contradictory concepts in their mind,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
We're supposed to be afraid. We're supposed to be afraid of ISIL, ISIS, woo-woo, false flag terrorism. But at the same time, you cannot criticize Islam. You cannot criticize, these raping immigrants. And if someone has the audacity to defend themselves from one of these raping immigrants, well, it's the victim who's going to go to jail. It's the
Oh,
victim
yes,
who's
they
going to, get
prosecuted a
arrested.
girl who
In
used
Denmark, yes,
pepper spray to
yes,
defend herself from a guy who tried to rape her,
yes,
and
yeah, yes,
she was prosecuted. It's incredible.
yes. Well, it just shows you who is really in control, right? Because there's no logic to any of that, right? And so, getting back to the notion of these agencies striving to remain relevant because they're quickly losing their grasp of things. For example, the CIA supposedly, I didn't even bother checking this out because to me it was ho-hum news. The CIA supposedly declassified a bunch of information about UFOs. It's just going to be another limited hangout. It's not going to be anything you can sink your teeth into, right?
Exactly.
So, just like when Nick Pope and all these other gatekeepers not too long ago started blowing smoke about how the British Ministry of Defense was going to come out with all this woo-woo
They'll
information
never come.
about UFOs. That was just, once again, diluted, watered-down chicken feed, as they say in the intelligence community. It was chicken feed, nothing to sink your teeth into. Uh, and so it's just an effort on their part to remain relevant. We are the experts. Don't go to these, Joe
Yeah.
Six-pack people, as Nick Pope calls them. Anyone who, reports or claims they've seen a UFO who is not an official person in the military or in government. Oh, Nick Pope writes them off as being, a Joe Six-pack. Yeah, thank you very much, Nick, who clung on to the Bentwater story in order to, make a big splash in the UFO scene. Uh, so, so yes,
What
they're
about
desperately.
CERN? What do you think about CERN?
Well,
Because
I
it
believe
is a concern, if I
it is
may
a
be a
concern.
little poetic about it. CERN is a concern.
CERN is a concern. CERN is not the only thing to worry about. I believe there are other things that we don't have any clue about, at least that they have not allowed into the public domain, information-wise, that may be even worse than CERN. But just what we know about CERN, right, is somewhat alarming. If I understand it correctly, it's two gigantic counter-rotating magnetic fields, and their stated aim is to open portals into a parallel universe. It's just it's madness.
and
The
then all,
veils are already thinning between worlds anyway.
they're trying to break all hell, make all hell break loose. That's how I feel about it.
Yes, because the veils are already thinning. More and more people are being taken up as host by non-human interdimensional entities.
I was
This is why.
I was recently reading about the Schumann resonance,
Yes,
and I mean the vibrations of the Earth are really going up, and I think
yes.
that's another reason people are going nuts, because I don't think we can all adjust to this raising of frequency.
Yes, those who are of a naturally denser, lower vibration, who have negative energy attachments or have been taken up as a host, by one or more negative parasitic entities. Pardon my Anunnaki, but as they say in Texas, they're going batshit crazy. Is
They
what's
are.
happening all across the board. Like I said, even in these countries that have been disarmed, I mean, people are being attacked by machete-wielding nuts. They're being attacked. They're being stabbed. They're being bashed with baseball bats. It's just, it just shows you that gun control is only intended to disarm the populace. It's got nothing to do with public safety.
Of
And
course.
and so people that
I
were
don't think
also
they
on the
want public safety. I don't
no,
think
they don't. No, it's order out of chaos, which is the
that's their
the
motto.
driving force. It's their motto. It's the driving force and the driving motive behind the immigrant invasion. It's what the wonks and the military war colleges call asymmetrical warfare. That any means necessary in order to achieve a desired outcome in a warfare, guerrilla warfare sense.
Well,
So they
Mrs.
open the floodgates, let
Barbara,
all these immigrants in.
this is, I don't know if you've heard about Mrs. Barbara Lerner Specter. She is a Jewish Zionist activist who is trying to make, as she says, Europe multicultural. Europe is not going to be monolithic anymore. I wonder, is she also promoting this multiculturalism in Israel? I don't think so.
No, no, because they got the law of return there, and unless you're an Ashkenazi, uh, you know, white Jew, you have no chance of coming into the. Look what they do to Sephardic Jews over there, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, they can forget about that. No, it's only one way. It's only going into uh, these largely white nations to thoroughly create disruption, chaos, and havoc, and it's
Yeah,
order out of chaos.
that
It's
is the intention, and it's vividly clear to most people whether they want to believe it or accept it or not, because many of them are still in denial, unfortunately.
they're in denial because they can't see that. For example, the programming is such, even in people in the so-called truth community,
You said the
truthers,
key
and
word there,
yes,
programming.
truth. Yes, truth is the most subjective of words. There's people out there, oh, you can't talk about UFOs or crisis actors. You're going to discredit us. There's no
Yeah,
us. We're not some monolithic herd where we all think alike. Don't lump us into this us category. You
exactly,
know what I mean?
exactly.
There's different levels of truth, and so there's the people that are only wedded to an understanding of the five sense conspiracy because they've been brainwashed because their masters tell them
As David
that
Icke says, this starts from cradle to grave, and it goes to
yes,
grave.
yes.
And
They
schools
teach.
are now uh, programming centers. They're not really
That's right.
educational centers.
Oh, it's Consumal youth communist programming is what it is. They have these psychopath reptilian hybrid cops that attack the students for no reason, for chewing gum, for sneezing. It doesn't matter. They're
Yep.
just teaching them from an early age that they're slaves, basically. And just to complete that point about the programming and the self censorship that goes on, these same people who say that, oh, UFOs don't exist, blue beam. I guess they think that NSA was around thousands of years ago, blue beaming everyone into believing in the gods and creating religions, right? And so there's this kind of ceiling that certain people hit. And what's interesting is they believe the same institutions which they know have lied to them. They believe the scientific community, bought and paid for, that tell them that UFOs and aliens don't and other dimensions don't exist, right? When they know from their own study of, say, the NIST report of the bogus explanation of why the twin towers came down, and et cetera, that the science that's proffered by the major institutions and by this matrix reality is all corrupted and bogus, and yet they cite it. They
Yep.
say, well, they buy into all the lies, and so we see this at different levels where, oh, we can't talk about the crisis actors. Of course, all those kids were killed at Sandy Hook and stuff. Oh, we can't talk about that because it's disrespecting the families. It's disrespecting the families of the
It's
victims,
all a
right?
theater.
Now, when people start talking like that, then they're either stupid or they're a gatekeeper. Because there's no us. Don't say it's going to discredit us. There's no unified movement.
Of
We're all at
course,
different levels of understanding.
exactly.
And so, the point of relevance here is when you see people going, oh, stop complaining about the immigrant invasion. It's that, that's divide and
Exactly.
conquer.
They should
That's the
come here
divide and
and see
conquer.
what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. Because and they'll soon experience it for themselves,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because
And what's happening
because
in Greece, because they're trying to make slaves out of the Greeks, is not by chance.
yeah, they've
Greece,
hated the Greeks all
Greece
along.
was specifically chosen, and what's going on in Greece right now was by design, and it's not for
Yes.
the money. And I can give you
No,
a
no.
little handful on what's going on right now that will freak
Yes,
you
yes.
out. As I
I'd like
said,
to
they're
know.
trying everything they've got on Greece. By raising taxes, I mean they are literally taxing the air that we breathe these days. I'm sorry I'm getting angry, but it's affecting me as a person too. Not
Well, yes. Yeah.
not to mention our social security and medical aid payments, which have risen to an unthinkable percentage. They leave people barely making ends meet, charging their credit cards to a tilt, or even becoming homeless and destitute. Human rights are being violated left and right now in Greece. I don't know what to mention first. The populace is in total shock and awe, with the exception of the farmers right now, who are out on the streets blocking the highways in Greece. Over 25,000 tractors on the streets right now, and they will not budge, which is a logical thing considering uh, they were hit incredibly hard by the government. The reforms, as I said, which will actually leave them losing their land and unable to survive. They're doing everything in their power to close all small business shops, etc. They are cutting pensions and wages. Once again, this is the left government, supposedly left. Um, and generally, things are going from bad to worse. If something doesn't give, if the people don't rise up against that this totalitarian regime, I will say it because it is like that, uh, you'll be looking at the most inhuman genocide without a shot being fired the world has ever seen. Sorry for my outburst, but I'm sure you can appreciate where I'm coming from. I
Yes,
mean, I'm
yes.
living through this hell myself. If I
Yeah,
wasn't
tell.
there, I wouldn't have believed our patriotic, my foot, politicians. I wouldn't believe they would have the heart to betray a nation, supposedly their nation, this way. They're apparently making the template with Greece. No other European nation is going through this. But make no mistake, if they succeed with Greece, the sky is the limit for them. That's all I had to say about the subject of Greece because it hurts and I don't want to keep on harping on it.
Well, I feel your pain.
And
There's
I
certain
know through
countries.
you that people who, non-Greek people who are going to see this show will understand a little better what's going on here.
Yes. To a lesser degree, we're seeing it happen in Italy and
It
Spain,
is,
but
yeah, it
Greece
is.
was targeted. There's three countries that have always been despised by the controlling faction, and that's Greece, Germany, and Russia. And that's why Russia, how many hundreds of millions of people perished there through starvation, through mass murder, through torture, being pitted against Germany, another long-suffering country. right?
Yeah.
And they've always demonized the victims, blame it on the victim, blame it on the Greeks for bringing this upon themselves when it was these placemen, Goldman Sachs type
Goldman
uh,
Sachs,
financiers that brought uh, derivatives
as I said,
to
this whole
Greece.
situation is by design. They're
Yes, it is.
taking every cent we own, and that's not because they need the money. The elites have the money to feed nations and to feed them like 10 generations after them in their families. So it's not about the money. It's by design because
It's
they
about
want
control.
they want us to kneel. Well,
Yes, it's all.
they picked the wrong nation to mess with, let me tell you.
Yes, I agree because the one thing about the Greeks is that they won't take this lying down. They have a long, rich history of standing up for themselves, whether it was against the Persian Empire, whether it was the German occupation in World War II, which the Greeks were suckered into that by the British government.
Oh,
That's a whole nother story,
oh yeah.
where the British government manipulated the Greeks into accepting a token. It's not even accurate to say a British force because once again the British used Commonwealth troops, in this case Australian and New Zealand troops, as throwaways because they knew they were basically there on a suicide mission. And so by putting a token British quote unquote force in Greece, they knew it would bring in the Germans, and that's exactly what they wanted. And then afterwards, the British contrived this whole civil war with the communists in order to further fragment Greece national sovereignty and make it easier for them to come under the shadow of Turkey and the rest of NATO. So the Greece has been in the crosshairs of the globalist gangster cartel for a long time now. But thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for listening.
Well, everyone needs to know it's because it's a harbinger of things to come. You have capital controls there where you is it a fact that you cannot even use the internet to send money overseas to make a purchase, and you have limitations on how much you can pull out of your bank account
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Capital controls are still up and running since July 2015.
Yes, what we're seeing is what they used to call IMF shock therapy. They indebted the country, and now, in order to supposedly get the country back on its feet, they institute these International Monetary Fund uh, shock therapy measures called SAPs, structural adjustment programs, which is quite apt because just as one draws the sap out of a tree, they're sapping the lifeblood of Greece. And what they do is, in order to free up money to service this rollover debt that's being serviced and sent out of the country to the international banking cartel, they cut off all the basic services. They get rid of all the social services. They get rid of all the most of the infrastructure. Are sold off to private transnational
Yeah, yeah,
corporations.
yeah.
Uh, all the unions, everything is just shut down until what you have is this mass hemorrhaging of resources and money out of the country, leaving Greece just like a husk, like an empty shell. Is what we saw also in the past, although it didn't happen overnight like with Greece. It didn't actually take a long time. I think of Argentina. There was a time, and you can see this in old Hollywood films, where Argentina was synonymous with a wealthy country. Everybody seemed to be a millionaire rancher. Everyone seemed to live in a palatial estate. But because of the Milton Friedman uh,
Yeah.
Chicago School of Economics, along with the IMF shock therapy, they took Argentina from one of the richest countries, not just in Latin America, but throughout the world, and reduced it to like abject poverty to the point where, in order for the ruling military junta to maintain any semblance of control, they had to they allowed themselves to be manipulated into a war with Great Britain in 1980, the Falklands War.
Yeah.
So that was just a little diversion uh, vis-a-vis the Argentinian citizens give them a false sense of patriotism, give them a false sense of hope, while their infrastructure and their economy was coming apart at the seams because of the IMF shock therapy once again. And this is what happened with Yugoslavia,
Oh,
a very strong, and you can see Yugoslavia, Greece, right? You can see the interconnectedness there, where once again,
Greeks were the only ones supporting Yugoslavia during
yes,
that horrible war.
yes, Yugoslavia once again was a very strong country. It was finally unified after all that time. One has to kind of, it goes back way back, but you see what happened with Yugoslavia with Mihailovic. He was the Chetnik leader in World War II. He was the only, him and his Chetniks were the only ones that were really fighting against the Germans. The Chetniks under Mihailovic rescued thousands of American air crewmen who were shot down or otherwise had to ditch their airplanes, bail out over the Balkans. The Chetniks rescued thousands of them. But what did the media do? The British Special Operations Executive uh, office in Bari, Italy, was run by two people, two high-ranking British officers who were both dyed-in-the-wool communists. One of them was Jack Krugman, who played a key role in protecting and developing the Cambridge spy ring in England. And Jack Krugman ensured that no British Allied supplies would reach Mihailovic and the Chetniks. They only supplied Tito and the communists. And Tito and the communists didn't fight much against the Germans. The only ones who fought against the Germans were the Chetniks. So as the war is winding down and the Western armies are stood down by Eisenhower following the orders of his masters, the Eastern and Central Europe is overrun by the Soviet Red Army, exactly how they intended to be. Yugoslavia was turned over to the communists. Mihailovic was branded a collaborator and a war criminal, was executed, despite delegations of these American air crews who were rescued in the Balkans in World War II, going to the White House and petitioning President Harry Truman. It didn't matter. Mihailovic was executed as a Nazi collaborator. And then,
you are quite a historian. I'll take you a little bit more recently than that.
well, what they did with Milosevic, yes.
Yeah,
Milosevic,
but also with Greece. I'll take
yes.
you to 1974 when Mr. Kissinger mentioned Greece and said the following. Excuse me, I have to read this. He said, and that was 1974, 42 years before today, right? The Greek people are anarchic, and difficult to tame. For this reason, we must strike deep into their cultural roots. Perhaps then we can force them to conform. I mean, of course, to strike at their language, their religion, their cultural and historical reserves, so that we can neutralize their ability to develop, to distinguish themselves, or to prevail, thereby removing them as an obstacle to our strategically vital plans in the Balkans, the Mediterranean, and in the Middle East. That was Henry Kissinger in 1974, my dear friend.
Yes. Yes, by then he
And,
was,
and everything he said came to fruition now.
yes, spoken like a true Zionist. By then he was
A reptile.
figurehead Gerald Ford, Secretary of State. He's a reptile too. He was
Yeah.
Gerald Ford, Secretary of State. If one reads Anatole Brinden's voluminous, huge memoirs, he was the Soviet ambassador to Washington D.C. He has some interesting things to say about Kissinger, and De Brennan quoted Gerald Ford as always saying Kissinger's policy, as if he was just a mere figurehead, which he was. And with Kissinger, it was all about divide and conquer. It was all about the global strategy of tension. It was all about ensuring that this Bolshevik communism.
That's all they know to do, and it's written in the protocols of the learned of Zion. All was
Yes.
written. It was all
Yes, and
written.
even if some people claim that's a hoax, but the thing about it is the proof is in the pudding. Whether or not
A hoax, but it's
the
coming
protocol, yes,
exactly
yeah, the proof is
as
in the
written.
pudding. Whether or not the person who wrote that intended it as a hoax, the end result is the same. The proof is in the pudding, and also people have tried to uh, be dismissive about Grand Master of Freemasonry Albert Pike when
Oh,
the quotes that were attributed to him, and of course there's Talmudic roots that
of
or
course.
are underneath and underpin all of Freemasonry. That was basically created by the Talmudic scholars and Zionists anyway. And Pike said that the Third World War will be a war between Islam and the Christianity, and even some of these bought and paid for academic elitists are talking about a clash of civilizations. But again, it's this weird dichotomy, this weird paradoxical, seemingly mutually exclusive thing going on, where uh, we're supposed to be afraid of ISIL, but they're flooding the West with all these immigrants, many of whom are going to be ISIL and ISIS anyway, and it's a hands-off policy where they can't, all these so-called security services can't do anything about it, because if they did try to do something about it at a much higher level, they would be ordered to stand down. That's how it always is. So,
Exactly.
what it is, it's creative destruction, is what it is. It's urban renewal. Think of all of Europe being destroyed, in the
The
especially
social
Germany.
fiber being destroyed.
Yes, yes. And what Kissinger said about Greece, he said about any number of countries too, but Greece in particular, because of the cultural identity of the Greeks, which goes
And
back thousands
and
of years.
and its strategic position. These two
The
things.
strategic position, yes, which is why the British had to pull Greece into World War II, to create, make it a battleground basically, and which would leave it ripe for a communist insurgency after World War II. Just as there was a communist takeover in Yugoslavia, just as they left the door wide open for the Soviet Red Army to overrun
Mhm.
uh, Eastern and Central Europe. In America, it was more, and the UK, it was more of a Fabian socialist strategy, whereby these academics, these people in the bureaucracies, many of them were imbued with this kind of collectivist Bolshevist creed, were just turned loose in order to indoctrinate the young, indoctrinate their students, and create this Bolshevik collectivist mindset. And now you see it in England, where it's, if a homeless person is caught being homeless, he's got to pay £1,000 fine. It's like, if he had £1,000 to just shell out every
He
time he
wouldn't
needed
be
to pay it,
homeless.
he wouldn't be homeless. But it's this parasitical
It's
kind of
ridiculous. There's no logic.
milking.
There's no logic.
No, it's no logic. There's no logic. And what we're seeing in America too, where people with vegetable gardens, they're being raided by the police. These farmers markets, and these farmers co-ops, where people have the like a community effort, where they share their produce and whatnot. They're getting harassed because they don't want people to be self-sufficient. They want them to be entirely dependent upon the system, and they only want them eating bad food. So they
Exactly.
sicken and they die.
Exactly.
So what we're seeing here, and it's all tied in with Nibiru and Planet X, because they are pushing up against a celestially driven timetable. In their mind, they have to implement all this, which they won't have time. Their plans are already coming apart at the seams. Actually, uh,
Thank
they, they're
God.
they're they're striving to implement all of this, having a what they hope will be a controlled collapse of the economy in time, so that they can plausibly say, okay, mass civil unrest. The stock market has crashed. We already know from the Baltic Dry Goods Index that the cargo shipping has ground to a halt. Shipping of cargoes and foodstuffs all over the world is not happening. So give the dumbed down, sheeple population a day, 3 days at the outside without basic services, water, which is already fluoridated anyway, but water, electricity, natural gas. Uh, just take away their basic services, and then when the looting starts, I figure, maybe 4, 6 hours, all the stores will be looted, just as the case with Katrina. In the aftermath of Katrina in New Orleans, they
Yeah,
will
yeah, yeah.
prevent any provisions from being brought into the affected regions, and they will just seal off all these large population centers and probably let people eat each other like rats for the first week or two, and then the UN troops will come rolling down Main Street, USA, like a bunch of big oranges, basically.
Mm.
So that is how they plan to roll. No pun intended. But
But we have to
they're gonna run into resistance though, because as
exactly.
Gerald Celente says, when people got nothing left to lose, they're gonna lose it.
They're
And
gonna lose.
and 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 it
Exactly.
should be pointed out. It should be pointed out that although the Vietnam War, like the Korean War, like a lot of campaigns in World War II, were never meant to be successful. They were just meant to just drag out World War II and allow time for the Soviet Red Army to move in from the east. Uh, Granted, the Vietnam War was never meant to be won, but when you look at what a largely peasant guerrilla force the Viet Cong was able to do against the might of the U.S. military and allied nations, right? Fought them to a standstill, basically, and then also the effectiveness that the North Vietnamese Army (NVA) had against the U.S. military forces. That was the up till this recent time, that was the longest war in U.S. history. It was
Yep.
like over 10 years plus, and they couldn't make a dent. And it was Vietnam and Southeast Asia was meant and designed to be communist. Just to digress for a second, the guy who became known as Ho Chi Minh later modeled his constitution after the U.S. Declaration of Independence and Bill of Rights. It almost read word for word like the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. And this same Ho Chi Minh, his life was saved by the OSS Deer Team during World War II. He was basically a Vietnamese guerrilla leader against the Japanese occupational army. The OSS American Deer Team rescued him, and then just like so many people who were once U.S. Western allies, Ho Chi Minh, Noriega, Saddam Hussein, all these different people, they flipped the switch and turned them into woo-woo bad guys later. Like the Soviet Union, how many times were they good guys,
Oh yeah. Oh,
bad guys, and now they're bad guys? And what's interesting is the last few years, you see the steady rollout of all these Hollywood movies where the Russians are once again depicted as the bad guys.
yeah.
Russian intelligence, the Russian mafia, the Russian people. It's one movie after another because they know the people are just going to sit there and just watch it
There's another thing
and buy into it,
is
right?
there's another thing with this Hollywood business. Lately, they're giving out real uh, facts. Like, for example, I was watching Zorro tonight with Antonio Banderas, and they're talking about this order that has the symbol of the planet Earth being surrounded by a snake, you know, and like they're giving you little bits and pieces of information which before were only the, let's call it conspiracy community was privy to. And all of a sudden now it's coming out in the form of films, in the form, in the new X-Files series. I don't know if you've watched the new X-Files series. I freaked out. I mean, Mulder is all of a sudden this opposition resistance guy that has come to realize what the government is doing, blah, blah, blah. Plus, they indicating stuff about the aliens. I was watching this episode and I was like, Wow, what are they doing? What are they trying to do now? They're giving out a lot of truths, and I don't get the reason for that. I don't know if you can tell me, enlighten me of this.
Well, there's a movie lately. I actually fell asleep the last 40 minutes, but it's called Jupiter Ascending, I think it is. And
Yeah, I've heard
what
about
I
them.
saw of it, what I saw of it was interesting because it had some definite Anunnaki overtones where these aliens they talked about genetically, if memory serves, uh, genetically engineering basically not only a slave race but also genetically engineering a slave race that would also be utilized as a food source. Very interesting,
Oh,
and and jibes with actually what a lot of what's going on, and it it depicted these rivalries between the different factions of this family of aliens. Very similar to the Anunnaki story, where you have the Enkyites on the
and
one hand
Enlil on the other.
and Enlil on the other. And up till now, we've been told that Enki is the good guy. But how do we know that? What if they just flip the plot around? And what if he was not as benevolent as they make it out? What if the forces you know that were marshaled by Enlil, uh, what if they were the ones that were trying to rectify things? Who knows? I mean, because as Napoleon says, what is history but lies agreed upon? History is all
Exactly,
fiction, right?
exactly.
And so, these Anunnaki would have had a vested interest in creating this kind of myth. Well, in the modern use of the term myth, not the original term of
Do
myth,
you
as you know.
believe that some alien race, whether it's Anunnaki or not, I don't care. Do you believe that our DNA was tampered with?
Yes, many times. The Anunnaki were not the first. That's one of the disinformation campaigns spewed out by the Anunnaki, that they created the human race as a crossbreed between them and some hominoid or hominid uh, being on the planet, when actually, according to the lore of the Aborigines in Australia, the Native Americans in America, they'd been here for a long, long time before that. The Aborigines say they've been here for over 1 million years on Earth. They were brought here by from the Pleiades, and then
Yeah,
the Native Americans say they've been here uh, for a very long time. They were brought, depending on the tribe, they were brought either from the Pleiades or from Sirius. So the Anunnaki may have created humanity 4.0, 5.0. We know from the research done by people like Michael Cremo and the late great Dr. Richard Thompson in the classic work Forbidden Archaeology, that humanity, based on artifacts, tools, footprints, skeletons, etc., has been here for literally millions of years, as we understand Homo sapiens sapiens. So, and also, of course, there were quite advanced civilizations here on the surface in the past. So, the Anunnaki did genetically engineer a specific hybrid race. And what's interesting also is the Enki line is where these long-lived hybridized variants of themselves came from. We hear stories of Noah, Methuselah, with these immensely long lifespans, right? Maybe that's why the Enlil forces, created this deluge. Sure, there was so-called collateral damage, unfortunately, which killed off a lot of people, flora and fauna, and animals too. But
well, it's said
in
that
their
the Greek gods were also, the ancient Greek gods were also aliens
yes,
residing
I would say yes.
on Olympus. And there
I
was a
would
lot
say
of
so.
genetic testing there too that is now
Yes,
considered mythology,
yes.
like various monsters in the Greek mythology. So I think there is something to all that.
Yes, there is, and the reports we've had from the underground genetics labs, and of course there's off-world genetics labs, because a lot of these alien races are genetic engineers par excellence.
I
But
think the
just what,
reptilians are very good on that.
yes, the reptilians are very good at that because they manage to imbue genetically and spiritually, magically, technologically, their onerous characteristics of rapaciousness, of greed, of violence, of sadism, cruelty.
And I've heard lately that they have such a good grasp of genetics that they can. I mean, the shape shifting is part of their genetic, the genetic knowledge that they can do it at will. You know, shape shift at will
Yes, yes,
and appear human when they're not.
yes.
I don't.
Even the Emerald Tablets talks about this, and if one looks at the lore of Native Americans, for example, Nanabush was this creator god of the Ojibwa, if memory serves, the Ojibwa tribe, and Nanabush was always warring against the lizard people, right? And I mean, literal wars against the lizard people, and throughout the folklore and the institutional memory of all these cultures throughout the world, they frequently talked about wars in heaven, which also manifested as wars on earth, sometimes between
As above, so below.
humans and giants. Yes, as above, so below. So, the point of relevance to the Jupiter Ascending movie is it's yet another example of they're putting it in your face, right? Okay, and there's
They're
another
putting
movie
a
too.
lot in our face lately. That's
Yes,
what I
there's
want.
another movie,
Yeah, which one?
uh, 2010, which was a takeoff from 2001, A Space Odyssey, written, if memory serves, by Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke was a longtime CIA asset,
Hmm?
and he was also a pedophile. In fact, his first novel he wrote, which I haven't found yet, it's out there somewhere, called Childhood's End, is all about these huge ships coming from outer space, and then there's these Draco-looking creatures, these winged reptilian beings who present themselves as friendly aliens, but they're really, they were gods sometime in a distant past, and they're here to like take over again, and humanity's only chance is to spiritually ascend, right, in order to avoid being like consumed on a mass scale. So anyway, Arthur C. Clarke, he came out with 2001 Space Odyssey, and the book, which was later made into a movie, and then it came out with 2010, which was a sequel, and at the end of 2010, one of the gaseous giants, I can't remember if it's Saturn or one of the other ones in the outer part of the solar system, was somehow ignited and turned into a second sun.
Son.
And of course, there's all the esoteric, occultic meaning about the black sun, Saturn, the Saturn moon matrix, as David Icke calls it,
David
the
Icke
ring
says
makers of
that
Saturn.
Saturn was once the sun. Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me because it's big enough to be a sun. And so, in the end of that movie, they show a second sun in the sky. Well, that's what's going on now. There's a second sun in the sky, and we're not for
We
this.
are gonna go. We're gonna be back at some point in time to discuss this sun thing because I'm looking into it now about the sun. Like it's cold fusion and not whatever, you know.
Yeah, it's a plasma electric universe, and just shows you how lame these scientists and astrophysicists are. They claim that stars are formed by like an agglomeration of all these hydrogen and helium molecules all in one place, and somehow so many of them clump together magically. There's some ignition, and then nuclear thermonuclear burning occurs at the core. Everything about it is wrong because the hotter part of the sun is on the outside of it, not on the inside, and also it's a plasma electric uh, universe. What we see in the plasma, the plasma laboratories is scale invariant. We see the same things in the lab that we see as far as stellar formation, as far as galactic formation. So even their basic models of how stars and how galaxies are formed are all wrong. Why anyone even pays attention to the lamestream science
Who knows?
in this late date is beyond me. But anyway,
I've stopped paying
they're
attention.
showing it. It's almost like they're acting out some kind of spiritual law whereby they have to tell us in kind of cryptic,
Yeah,
vague ways
they
of
have.
what they're doing next.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. We have to end this on a positive and optimistic note.
Yes, absolutely.
And because I'm not a doomsayer, and I know you're not. And I want to believe that they are going to be overturned real soon, that things are going to come to a head where there's no turning back, maybe this year, maybe next year, but soon, soon in the near future. What do you feel about that?
What a lot of people, certainly the those truthers wedded to the 5 cents conspiracy, who've been dumbed down into thinking that aliens and the so-called gods of yore don't exist, what they are not and cannot figure out is that there are other factors and factions at work. Because of the fundamental constants changing, the Schumann resonance frequency increasing, because we're once again in alignment with the galactic core, it's making it easier for these benevolent, spiritually evolved, at times higher dimensional ETs to make more of an overt, if you will, intervention.
Anyway,
Whereas in the past, they their help was very subtle, very nuanced. They almost worked exclusively through ground crew, if you will, hybrid humans who are essentially descended from them. Now, because the frequency is increasing and the density is increasing in our perhaps in the whole plane of existence, it's making it easier for them to spend more time here comfortably, intervene and interact more. So we have to take into account that if they decide that there will be no thermonuclear war, there won't be, because we know from the past that they made a habit of going around to all these ICBM missile bases, deactivating all these nuclear
yeah, yeah,
warheads, putting all these missiles in a no-go status in Russia and in the U.S.
yeah.
We know that
So,
they've actually we know they've actually hijacked and stolen thermonuclear weapons right out of B-52s in bases in England and other places. So, and if there were to be a thermonuclear war, it would be limited. But I don't think it would be allowed to spiral out of control, because this other force, this countervailing force, has now entered the picture.
and as
Because
you said, the veils are thinning, and
the veils are thinning.
people
Yes,
are beginning more and more to see things that they couldn't see before. Not
yes,
only on
yes.
a spiritual level, but on an intellectual level as well.
I agree. Thank you so much for having me on, Vicky. I'd love to come
So
back on.
much for talking to me again tonight. Tonight in Greece, this morning for you, I think. uh, we'll be back. Be well. God bless.
Goddess bless.
And
Bye.
we'll be back again. Bye bye.